Welcome, everybody. My name is Carly Graham Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Montclair State University, and welcome to our next installment of Weekly Women Entrepreneurship. I am excited to be sitting virtually with my old neighbor in meatpacking, Pauline Nakios, who is the co-founder and creative director of the fashion brand, although she's going to explain it better, Lilla P. Pauline, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about what Lilla P is. I've been a customer, but tell us more about your brand and the customer you serve.
Sure. Well, I started the company in 1998, which when I look at that now, it sounds like it was a million years ago, but business was different. There was no e-commerce at that point. There was really, at that point, also no social media. So what it is now is very different than when it started. I started really as a t-shirt company. I had worked all in retail all through college. The trend went from having these oversized big, fraternity Hanes BPT t-shirts. All of a sudden the girls started wearing all the little fitted baby, we called them baby tees at the time. And I worked at a clothing store all through college. And then when I graduated University of Georgia in 94-ish, I moved to Atlanta, and it just became very clear I was going to give this a shot. There were a few steps in between. I'd worked in retail again. It was a recession, so getting a job in my field, which was commercial interior design, was tricky. So I went to what I knew was retail, and I loved fashion. And I had really, the t-shirt was really a staple in my personal wardrobe. And I'd worked for an ad specialty company who then started producing their own clothing. And that was really my first entree into manufacturing. And it was I look at it now, and it was such little information that I knew. But I did take that and then took what I was wearing and what I loved and what I'd been selling. I saw what the trend was, and decided to just try to create, I know that sounds like, a very typical expression, but the perfect tee. And 22 years later, 22 and a half years later, we're still going at it, but we're more than t-shirts now. So Lilla P started, it took me years to say we were more than a t-shirt brand, but now we're really a lifestyle brand that does focus on tops, and everything we do is synergistic to cotton, comfort, ease, perfect fit. Those are those brand pillars that you can see on our website.
Yeah, that's great. So there's so much there, from sort of the design aspect to also the manufacturing aspect that you mentioned. But before we go there, soft fabric and fit, and I'll also add durability is something that I know is not, front brand, but it's true. The tops that I bought from you guys last and last and last through many, many washings. So, I mean, why, especially now that we're in a moment around sort of sustainability, and certainly sort of resale and vintage is up in the forefront. I mean, tell us more about how those core aspects of your brand have mattered, and how do you sort of lean into it, especially when fast fashion has exploded, although maybe we're in another moment where it's going to explode again. How have you stayed true to that, and then also found manufacturers that have been aligned with your brand?
Right. So, again, obviously we're a business. At the end of the day, we want to move product. So I do battle with that. How do we become sustainable? What makes Lilla P? What can we do to better? But I still, in order to sustain a business, it's the volume of sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, from two aspects, the fabrics that we use, we do a lot of Pima cotton. It's not fast fashion. We're not the least expensive t-shirt on the block, but I'm a very practical person in general. I'm a very practical shopper. So I do want to buy things that I can get I call it my CPW, my cost per wear. So I do want people to have longevity out of the clothing they buy from us, not only from a fashion standpoint, where you can wear my clothing season after season. I'll look at some of our older stock. It is absolutely still on trend. Every season we will nod to the trends, but Lilla P is definitely not a one and done. It's not a season. It's not okay, cold shoulders are in, so my whole line is cold shoulders. We might have had one. Of course, it was a bestseller, which pained me because it was my least favorite trend of the last several years. But you do have to nod to those trends, and those are those pieces that are not going to necessarily have longevity in your closet, not because they won't last, but because the style changes. So we really are we can cater to all ages. You, while we have coined what we think the Lilla P woman is, she really is, gosh, she's 30 to 65 and toggles on either side of that. And it's how you wear it. So we really want to be those pieces in your closet that you reach to, you reach for. It's at the top, that first t-shirt because you've worn it and washed it and laundered it, and it's at the top of your stack again. We want to be that one you reach for. And that people look back and they're like, wow, I really wore this t-shirt constantly. So it was worth possibly a little bit more than a Gap t-shirt or a Target t-shirt, but because you're wearing it more often, there we're sustainable. We're doing our little bits and pieces on our end from a manufacturing side to be more sustainable. And I have learned over the years, some things matter to the customer more than others, and some things are a marketing tool. So it's deciphering through all of that I think is important as well for your brand and for your business.
Yeah, that's really great. So I have more questions on sort of positioning your brand as well as meatpacking in general, because it's a storied neighborhood that's become famous fast. But talk to us first about your journey as an entrepreneur. So you mentioned working in retail. You mentioned sort of having this passion around solving the problem of creating the perfect tea. But tell us more about, did you ever imagine that you'd be running your own business? You made, just because I know, because you've shared with me, you come from a family that there was some entrepreneurial blood in your veins, but how has that experience been, just sort of from concept to actually building a business?
I look back and as I mentioned to you, my family was in furniture in Charleston. They had a furniture store called Morrisokol Furniture that started in 1921. So it was almost a 100-year-old company when my parents started to think about winding down. There was no, there was definitely a full family full of our generation, and nobody was interested at that point in taking over the business. So that did end up closing, but that's what I knew. That's what I grew up with. The dinner time conversations were about retail, wholesale, or suppliers, distribution. So it was just natural, and I definitely could see myself working for somebody else, but part of this was always seeing my parents, my father in particular, work for himself. It was a generational business, so my grandfather had started it, and then my father ran it. And when I started Lilla P, to be honest, and I told you before that I'm so open to owning my errors and my mistakes. And in fact, I have a high school group from Atlanta and a college group from Arizona come through the office every year, and I'm very open about telling them where I went wrong, because had I had someone tell me, or if I'd known where to search for that information, I probably could have skirted through some of these issues in entrepreneurship and business early. So I had this idea, but did not thoroughly think long term. I did not have a business plan. I'm not sure I knew what a business plan was. I was an art major. I thought I was going to go back for a master's in architecture. So I had this idea, and I just went with what I knew. And as a Southern raised woman, we were not taught to push. We were not taught to ask and pry and go knock on a door and say, can I sit with you for 10 minutes and pick your brain? That was so not in my DNA. I encourage young people to always ask, do those internships. It's amazing how much you learn, and the connections that you have are really where you learn so much of this information. I mean, school is so important and you learn the base, but real life skills I think happen in person. So I had started Lilla P with one t-shirt, one size, 5 colors in my house in Atlanta. And, I would go with my duffel bag store to store and did not even know that stores bought in advance of a season. That did not realize stores had an open to buy where they planned ahead. So all these things were big learning curves for me. And then my first sales rep, which is in order to really generate wholesale business, it can look different, but the way that I went around this, and this was 2002, I knew someone that had a sweater company. Someone I had met in Zimbabwe randomly had a sweater company in New York, and I had held on to that business card. And I remember feeling so nervous, but I picked up the telephone, not email, telephone, important. And I called him and said, do you remember meeting me? I've moved to New York. Can I come to your office? And he said, sure, come on up. I'd love for you to meet my sales manager. Well, next thing I knew, he introduced me to my first sales rep, who then introduced me to my second. And that's how these things go. So it truly is taking that step and using those connections that you make over time, or that someone says, why don't you reach out, and not be afraid to do those things.
Wow, there's so many nuggets of great advice in that. That's excellent. Well, so one thing that you mentioned that I really want to kind of dig into is distribution. So you, LillaP.com, you have an established, e-commerce presence. You, I imagine, do a bulk of your sales or web sales, although you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me more about sort of your retail strategy, because I remember, your flagship store on 14th Street in Meatpacking District being so approachable in a sea of intimidating luxury brands. And so I'd love to know kind of about your retail mix, but then also you sell directly to boutiques. And I was, I'll admit, shopping this past weekend and saw your brand in a little boutique in Long Island, and thought of you, and said to the store owner, I'm speaking with Pauline, and she said her team is phenomenal. They're so great, and we love their stuff. So
I'll have to share that. That's great.
Long-winded way of saying, what's kind of your retail strategy, and how have you leaned into e-commerce, especially in this moment of COVID?
Right. Well, this is something, I was on a panel last year, and I remember it was myself and two or three other brands that were newer, direct to consumer. They only make what they sold, and I'm sitting here sweating thinking of the inventory in my warehouse in Virginia. Again, I go back to the fact that we've been in business so long. We do have that more traditional style of business where we were and still are predominantly wholesale. So to answer your question, where I would say somewhere in the 85 to 90% wholesale, selling to the retailers.
Got it.
And we have been, obviously, in the last, 5 to 6 years, really been building and putting a lot of effort, energy, time, financial investment into the e-commerce, because while I know that that I am who Lilla P is because of our retail partners. So trying to balance that act is a real, and this is especially when one thing, even if you scroll back to my Instagram at the beginning of COVID, I ended up taking over my social channels because I felt it was so important to make sure that my consumer, whether it's the end user buying directly from me or my retail stores, knew that how much I appreciated those partnerships. And while I know that small business and specialty stores are struggling, I mean, certainly department stores as well, and I was fortunate not to have a lot of exposure in that department store arena. Thank goodness, because that was brutal for many brands my size and larger brands. I mean, I had little exposure there. But balancing the wholesale retail, obviously we're trying to grow that direct to consumer, but not at the expense of my relationships with my specialty stores. So what that means, one of the things that I felt extremely strong about and really pushed during COVID was so many brands quickly were like 30, 40 off, site-wide, blasting it, trying to get that desperate crisis mode business in. And I said to our marketing team, I'm like, team meaning very small team, but I felt extremely strong about the fact that we cannot do this. Here I am trying to ship my stores, like the one you just bought product from, and we're sell to about 700 stores across the country. I cannot undermine them when I'm trying to sell them at full price and discount on my website. So we strategically, from a marketing standpoint, had to pivot everything that we had planned for 2020, as everybody has, and I felt it was better to do segmented marketing, to do maybe first, when it was so cold up north and it was so hot down south, we just took a segment of sale customers up north in colder climates and did 20% off our sweaters. So a lot of times we would do sale on sale, not to compete with the product that was new and fresh on the specialty stores floors. And again, it was tough because a lot of these stores could not open, and some haven't opened.
Right.
I mean, you look at places that are still not open in a traditional way, but they had to pivot and sell on Instagram. A lot of them tried to quickly put up websites, which, I was on my 999 webinar of the season, but they said, don't rush and put the dollars and effort into setting up a website. go on social, do it the way you know how, because if you don't do those things well, they're not, it was pointless. So I saw incredible, there's a couple of stores in particular that whether I had bonds with them personally or bonded after as a result of COVID, where I would get on and we would do Instagram live. I spent 30, 45 minutes back and forth answering questions, having this lovely conversation. And then they followed up, and it was a lot of work, but they did a virtual trunk show where
Yeah.
they would promote. And we were thinking of creative ways, and you would not believe the business people generated in these small, and I found it was really the smaller towns, smaller communities where they had spent all these years in retail. And what a specialty store is known for is building that relationship. That is what you don't get online, right? You don't get the, oh, Susie, how was the wedding you went to last week? I think this would look so good on you. I know you love this color.
Right.
Um, Even there are a lot of great companies out there with algorithms, but it does not replace human contact and one-on-one. So I was there to support these specialty stores, but simultaneously grow. And e-com has grown for me, especially during COVID,
Mhm.
thankfully, because if we had relied solely on wholesale, I'd be in a real pickle. I mean, listen, business is not what it should be, but we're surviving.
Right.
And how to compare it to last year, you can't. So you
Mhm.
have to look in here and kind of rework what the goals are and relook at marketing strategies and not having visibility into what the next 6 months, not the next 3 months.
Right.
So we have to take what we learned during COVID and quickly learn to pivot when needed.
Right. Right.
So
So, I mean, all of that is really important for our entrepreneurs to understand. And I think sort of that pivoting and being nimble in the moment. But you just raised something that I think is vital and will be vital in what's, moving forward. It's what people are missing, which is that human interaction. And so there can be algorithms and there can be a lot of data behind the industry that you're in, but really sort of that personal touch is really valuable. We don't have a ton more time, but I do want to ask one question in particular, because there was a large piece this past week in the New York Times business section on Diane Von Furstenberg and her empire. She is clearly a neighbor to the meatpacking district neighborhood, and a mainstay. Her flagship store, I think in that article, she actually said that was one of the only stores that she's
I was relieved to see
open.
that.
But so this is a loaded question, and you've commented in this space already with what you've answered previously. But I mean, given what you read, and given what you're experiencing, what do you think is sort of the future of retail? Because so many big companies rely on data, right? And so in a couple of days, they can completely pivot when they see what customers are buying. But the relationship part of what you just mentioned is human nature. So what do you see happening in your industry?
I think you look at someone like Diane Von Furstenberg, and she is who she is because of who she is, right? It's that iconic dress. It's what she has built and her name. It's really, and she saw that. It's really her name. So she licensed. It's a smart move, and a lot of people have overextended themselves in retail. You look at all the big department stores, that's the biggest issue is rent, right?
Mhm.
So I think everybody has to look at what they have, where their value is. And, that's one of my touch points is that while I've been in business for 22 years, I'm still not a household name, which
Mhm.
also makes it fun for a shopper. Like, I know I'm the type that I don't want what everybody else has. I want to find that awesome something and share it with 5 friends and be like, oh my gosh, have you tried this XYZ?
Mhm.
And while that's a part, perhaps that, we have been talking about doing a referral program or an ambassador program with Lilla P, which we've not rolled out yet, but it's in the plans. And I think that for growth for me is going to be really building brand recognition in a subtle way. Because I don't want to be the hot today and not hot tomorrow. And that's, I think I've proven that we are not that because we have loyal customers that return to us season after season for years.
Yeah.
So finding those quiet ways to build brand recognition through referral. Um, but I do think there'll be a return to shopping small. You mentioned fast fashion. I think, listen, we'll see what happens. But there was I mean, the fast fashion, the Zaras and the H&Ms of the world put a damper on a lot of companies. And perhaps maybe COVID has taught us to pivot that a little bit further. And this gave me like I said, with me taking over social channels in my own voice, I would
Mhm.
love people to get to know me and that I am a business. And when they do purchase something from Lilla P, it truly is supporting a small business.
Mhm.
And to take that a step further, when you buy something from a store in your neighborhood or your town, they're supporting the store, they're supporting small businesses such as me. So it's important for people to step back and kind of relook at how we've been shopping and spending our resources, and how we're going to end up helping the economy grow.
Yes, well said. Pauline Nakios, thank you so much for
Thank you.
Tell us how our viewers who are in the US and elsewhere can find Lilla P and follow you on your social channels.
Yes, please, please, please. So social channel is at Lilla P, Lillap. You could also follow me at Pauline Nakios, which is my full name. And then, of course, our website is www.lillap.com, Lillap.com.
Thank you, Pauline, for sharing your story. I'm going to stop
Thanks.
recording. Stay with us.